Continuing with the Neil Young countdown. So this is part two. We've got videos number 35 through 26. So, it's interesting that most of these records I'd say the latter, what did we did, 8 or 9 the last time. Now we're counting down to 26. So 43 to 26. Most of them either fall in either of two camps. One is his 2010s records, or the other one is his 80s records, his kind of early to mid 80s records when he was on Geffen. So number 35 in my countdown is an album that he did in 2009, and it's called Fork in the Road. It's kind of sounds like the cover looks in my mind. Kind of tossed off, political, a little bit, but mostly it's all about his car, his Link Volt car, which I'm all for, using renewable energy and not burning a bunch of gasoline. And I can't say that I've converted a car to run off cooking oil, but Neil was real passionate about it, and it formed most of the lyrical content on Fork of the Road, and it kind of sounds like it. There's not too much memorable about it. There's a couple good songs on it towards the end, I think. Light a Candle, I think, was pretty decent. But most of it is just, I don't know. It's pretty skippable in my mind. The next one I want to get into is Storytone. So this is number 25. Storytone is a really personal record for Neil, and it's really heartfelt. So it's nice to see him, really delivering like an emotional record. I'd say the songs aren't quite there, but this comes at a time when Neil was getting divorced from Peggy, who he'd been married to for several years, and getting together with Daryl Hannah, falling in love again. So it's an album called Storytone. It's kind of a strange one in his catalog because it's orchestrated. He plays with an orchestra. I think he wrote these songs, recorded them, pretty much acoustic demos, and then gave them to the orchestra to learn it, and then he sang along with the orchestra. Now, one of the patterns that Neil has too is putting out records, especially in recent years, and then deciding that the version he has isn't quite enough. So there are three different versions of Storytone. There is the orchestrated one, then there is the demo one, pretty much, of just him acoustic mostly. It's just him doing all the songs. And I think that works better than the orchestrated one. And then he has yet a third one called Mixed Pages of Storytone, which sort of takes the best of the orchestra, dials it back a little bit. And I think probably use those demos in there, the acoustic ones in there as well. There's some good songs in there for sure, like Say Hello to Chicago. I think Tumbleweed was pretty decent. When I Watch You Sleep, and kind of real personal songs for Neil. It's kind of a mixed bag, but there is some really good material on there. I just kind of wish that Neil had recorded it in a different way and put out three different versions. He's unlikely to put out a fourth these days, but that's Storytone, and that came out in 2014. The next one on my list is another album that came out, 2016, so still during the 2010s, called Peace Trail. It's getting political. It's around the time, just shortly before Donald Trump came to power, and it's mostly Neil. I think he plays with a bass player and a drummer. It's pretty pretty essential that way, of just the core band, but or elemental rather than essential, elemental that way. But its content is just okay. It's another album that, there's a song called My New Robot, which is sort of kind of takes sort of that trance sound they did, and infuses it a little bit. But otherwise, it's a pretty kind of stripped down record. But it's just, I don't know, it's not that great. There's not too much memorable about it, which is a problem with a lot of these Neil Young records, especially in the 2010s. It has some songs like Glass Accident that I think are really good, but it's got songs like Indian Givers and Peace Trail and Terrorist Suicide Hand Gliders, which, they're okay, but they're not that memorable. Show Me is a memorable one. That's a pretty good one off there. But again, an album that's really kind of for the diehards only. The next one for me on my list here at number 32 is Back to the Geffen Years. And this album came out in 1983. Interesting story behind it. It's the album that Neil made when Geffen demanded that he put out a rock record. They were tired of hearing his experiments on trans. And I think he had already started working on Old Ways, and I don't think they liked that kind of material. They wanted to just hear Neil Young do like another rock record. Well, he gave him one, but it was more rockabilly and like a total kind of throwback to the 50s. It's a fun record. You can put it on and there's nothing offensive about it. It plays fine, especially if you just view it as just kind of a fun little detour. It's about a half hour long. Um, there's some silly song titles. Betty Lou's Got a New Pair of Shoes. Kinda Fonda Wanda. Kinda Fonda Wanda. Payola Blues. Wonderin', which is a song that he did back early on in his beginning of his solo career. It had a different title, but he took the melody and he used it to finish it with a song called Wondering on here. Fun album. I must say, I'm very pleased that I did not get into this album when it came out. I'm really glad, 1983, that I didn't catch any videos for these songs, because it was like the height of 50s throwback kind of stuff. There, you had 50s themed restaurants. We're still kind of stuck in some romanticizing the 50s things politically, but in the 80s it seemed to me more of a nostalgia kind of thing that would show up in other ways. So this would have turned me off the videos, because it's about as cheesy as you can get, and Neil just looks like a complete dork. So very glad I didn't get into Everybody's Rockin', or especially the videos at the time, because it might have destroyed the interest that I had in Neil, or it would have taken a lot longer for me to finally, get into him. Number 31 is an album that, frankly, I thought would be a lot more towards the bottom. I thought it would be at the bottom. It's an album that a lot of people would probably put in last place. Came out in 1986, still Geffen years. It was the second, I think, album for Geffen, second or third on his contract, and that's Landing on Water, rather. Very odd cover for Neil. There's nothing else in his catalog that kind of looks like this. There's nothing else that really sounds like it either. I mean, it kind of takes that trance sound using the vocoders and the kind of distorted vocals and the technology of the day. But I was pleasantly surprised that I thought it sounded kind of modern too. The production is a little lighter of a touch than it is on trans. And the songs are kind of interesting. I mean, you have Hippie Dream that he played later on, but for me it was live. But for me, what I thought was really interesting was songs like Weight of the World and Violent Side, and I think Touch the Night, where it was like these songs sounded really like, if you put them on before a show over the PA, like it would sound really good live, and it wouldn't sound, especially if you didn't know it was Neil, it wouldn't sound out of place with other songs of today. Not that I love the sounds of today, but Landing on Water probably deserves a slight revisit. It's probably not as bad as you remember. The next album for me came in 1988, and it was a blues exercise for him. I think one thing about Neil I find interesting is it seems to take these exercises in sound when there's like difficulty on the home front or the label, or he's got his child with cerebral palsy, that really severe case where he needed help with it. I really needed to help him. He seems to take these exercises of just identifying a genre and creating a record around it. And he did that in 1988 with This Note's For You. A pretty cool record. I mean, for a blues record, it's kind of cool. Like, if you just put it on, again, kind of like Everybody's Rockin', it sounds completely different. It sounds better. It sounds more, it's more of like a rock blues record. But it also had that song, This Note's For You. So for me, I was saying I'm really glad I didn't get into him in 1983 with Everybody's Rockin'. I did my introduction beyond the early hits and knowing who he was for, Harvest and Rust Never Sleeps was This Note's For You, the video. And it's funny, it won like Best Video, got all these awards, but MTV never actually really played it because they banned it due to all kinds of references to corporations. He ain't singing for Pepsi, he ain't singing for Coke, that kind of thing. But not a bad record. And there's a great live record, live at the Blue Note Cafe or something like that came out recently that is the band live on this tour, and it's quite good. So at number 29, got a record that a lot of people Are divisive over. A lot of people really like it, especially if they're into like alternative indie rock. I know Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth will say it's his favorite Neil Young record. Totally shocked, I think, anybody who picked up the record when it came out upon release. Definitely shocked his record company, Geffen, who wanted him to be, the classic like 70s Neil Young. And that's Trans. It came out in '82. It was his way of communicating with his son, apparently, who has a really bad case of cerebral palsy, and couldn't speak. He can't speak, so he was trying to communicate with him through a vocoder, distorting his vocals, using sounds through synthesizers. And I think it would work a lot better if it wasn't such a hodgepodge record. I think a lot of people think it's all that sound all the way through, but it's really not. It's that sound on about 6 of the tracks that were recorded in late '81, and then he did another session about 6 months later, where he did it with more like with Crazy Horse members, and it's more like traditional Neil Young that's slapped on there. But it makes for a really uneven listen. The highs are really good though, and the highs don't come from that traditional Neil Young sound. They come from songs like Computer Age, Transformer Man, Sample and Hold, and like an Inca's old one, which is kind of interesting because it's like a sequel to Cortez the Killer. It goes on about as long, but it's not nearly as interesting. Mr. Soul on here I thought was interesting. I think it was my introduction to Mr. Soul, which sounds strange, but pretty sure I heard it on here before I heard the Buffalo Springfield version, and I thought he was ripping off the Stones. It sounded like Jumpin' Jack Flash or something, from the Stones, and he was using it as Mr. Soul. But then when you hear the regular Mr. Soul, I don't think those comparisons go out the door. But that's 1982 and Trans. For number, what are we at? Number 28. Have kind of a strange Neil Young record because it references another record that never came out. It's like the sequel to something that doesn't really exist. It's called Chrome Dreams 2, and it came out in 2007. I'm getting weird reflections here. And it is another one of his hodgepodge albums. He did this a lot where he had compiled things from different sessions. This one has some tracks like Ordinary People, which is a great song, going back to, I think, the time of the Blue Notes, This Note's for You. I think it was that period. And then he has some other songs. He has Crazy Horse on like No Hidden Path. He's got some acoustic songs that are really nice and mellower songs. But it makes for a little uneven listen because it is such a hodgepodge of styles, and it's one that you can easily overlook. But there are some good moments of it, and it's one that warrants more listening, I think, for sure. Chrome Dreams 2, Neil Young. Hopefully someday we will see that unreleased album called Chrome Dreams, which this is a sequel to. Chrome Dreams was an album that apparently was ready to go. There were test pressings. It had a title, track list. And it was one of those albums that was rated the sessions for other albums that came later, like Rust Never Sleeps, and I think Hawks and Doves too, possibly. But someday, and it comes a time, most likely, someday we'll probably see that. I wouldn't be surprised if it's part of his upcoming Archives 2 box set. But it's an interesting album. It's still not quite, I wouldn't say it's essential, but it's interesting, especially for those 2 tracks, No Hidden Path and Ordinary People. I might have said we were going to 26. This is going to 27. I did take one of them that was batched with this group off, and I'm going to talk about that in the next video. Took it off because, frankly, I hadn't listened to it, and I didn't want to really rely on my memory and everything else I've been listening to recently if I hadn't listened to them in the last 6 months. And this album that it comes in at number 27 is an album by Neil Young, came out in 1981. This is following Rust Never Sleeps, Live Rust, where he comes back, for a lot of people, gets a new audience. He does that a lot. It seems like at the turn of the century, or the turn of the decade, 69, 79, 89. And it was a big album for him and huge tour, but he followed it with a dud of an album that I had in the last video called Hawks and Doves. And then this was a follow-up to Hawks and Doves, where Hawks and Doves was kind of in a mellower vein, at least most of it, half of it. Kind of like Rust Never Sleeps first half. This album, Reactor, is very much like the second half of Rust Never Sleeps, except everything is turned up to 11. It probably is the most rockin', heaviest, and loudest record that Neil's ever made. A lot of people probably wouldn't think that, but play it in your car sometime and turn it up. I mean, it's a very loud record. It's pure Crazy Horse. The songs aren't quite up there with his best albums, and sometimes the production gets a little in the way. He's trying to do sort of some of the elements he would do on Trans, which was a follow-up to this on this record. There's like an annoying kind of duck chorus thing. You have to hear it to believe it or really understand what I'm saying, to Opera Star. Opera Star is still a great song though. There's this album is especially known for a song called T-Bone, which consists of the lyrics "Got mashed potatoes, ain't got no T-bone" for about 8 minutes, and it kind of works. I don't know. I like it. You have to be in the mood for this album. This album does sustain a mood very well all the way through. It's like just one style of Neil consistently all the way through. You got songs like Southern Pacific, which is great. Now it's got like some sound effects. He was definitely playing around with that stuff on that song. The highlight of this for me, Motor City is a great song, but the highlight is the last song called Shots, which debuted on the Rust Never Sleeps tour during the acoustic portion of it. He never actually, when he made Live Rust, it wasn't included, of course. But apparently that's going to come out as part of the next Archives release, Archives 2, and you could actually hear it on his website. I heard it recently, actually saw the video of him playing it on the Rust Never Sleeps tour. Here it's very loud. It's great though. It's like such an underrated Crazy Horse song, Neil Young and Crazy Horse. And this album, again, I thought would be towards the end. I didn't think I would rate it this high, but strongly recommend Reactor once you've had, a lot of the classic Neil Young. And we've got 26 to go. So after you've had those 26, or frankly, if you're just looking for another Crazy Horse record, this is completely underrated by them, but it's way better than Life, which is a Crazy Horse album we talked about in the last video. So interesting. Like I said, most of these are the 2010s and the 80s, these videos, but we're going to get into the really good stuff in the next video. We go 26, start at 26 and start counting them down. I think we're going to do 3 more videos of this. And these are the records. The next 26 are much more interesting. They're albums that have a lot of fans around them, whether it's more acoustic stuff or more loud Crazy Horse albums. But for the most part, when you get into the last 26 albums, it's hard to go wrong with any of them. There's something to like about every single one. Neil Young's incredibly prolific. We just went through not his best moments, but there's certainly highlights, but it gets real good starting with the next video.